What's going on, YouTube? Dannydecks here. Today we are doing a 100 subs special, and we're going to be doing something a little bit different, which is a tier list. Before we get into the criteria that I will use to evaluate the cards and all of that stuff, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's helped and supported me. Anybody who's viewed my content, left a comment, subscribed, all of that. It really means a lot. As a small content creator, I notice every single thing. I try to reply to every single comment. And I'm doing my best. I'm trying to improve my content. I'm not stopping anytime soon. I see myself doing this for a very long time, assuming Legends of Runeterra sticks around, which I don't see why it's going anywhere. It's made by Riot Games. Riot Games does a wonderful job, and I think the game has a ton of potential to be a serious big player in the genre. Now, that out of the way, thank you very much, everybody. The criteria I'm going to use for the tier list. So, I think that when you're creating a tier list, for one, you're going to ruffle some feathers. Everybody has their own personal opinions and biases, and they think their champion should be here or there. And I apologize in advance. I welcome all forms of discussion. My mind can be changed. I'm not somebody who's stubborn. If you have some evidence and some facts, and I agree with it, then, maybe I'll update my list, or we can have a discussion in the comments. So feel free to let me know if you think I'm a poo-poo head or you agree with me. Another thing is, I don't want to do my tier list based on the meta decks currently going around. The problem with that is the example of Ari Kennen. While Ari Kennen, the deck itself is very powerful, which would, pretty much guarantee them the spot in S tier that everyone would expect, I don't believe that Kennen, specifically, Ari is actually a pretty versatile champion, and we'll get into that when we rank her, but I don't believe Kennen's that great. Outside of that deck, what does Kennen really do? Let's say, hypothetically, the deck gets nerfed to the ground. I don't think Kennen is all that competitively viable. He might find his way into another niche deck somehow. He'll weasel his way in. But yeah, he's definitely not going to be at Ari's level, in my opinion. So I'm not going to rank it based on current decks. The meta is always changing and evolving. A good example of that would be Pantheon. Pantheon was thought to be S tier for quite some time after release, and turns out he's really not. That's because people are going to, continue to develop their strategies, and decks fall in and out of favor, while the champions don't really change all that much. And that doesn't really account for balance patches either. A lot of times with the balance patches, they don't really nerf champions so much as they nerf the supporting cards of the champion, and they oftentimes will just bring a weak champion up to everyone else's level. I want my tier list to be reflective of the champion themselves. However, it's not going to be the champion in a vacuum, because that would be, Acel, he's a 10-10. He's the biggest, baddest guy around. And that's not really true. Acel, yes, while he is the strongest body and he does the coolest stuff, he's a 10-mana card. How versatile is he really? So there's a little bit of criteria in there. How versatile is it? How well do they fit? How well statted are they for their cost? And how future-proof are they? If you're a newer player and you don't have too many wild cards, and you might think like a particular champion is cool, this will give you a pretty good idea of how safe it is to craft them. Good example, let's just use Elise. Elise is extremely versatile. She fits in everything. She's pretty much been meta from day one. She hasn't been changed. Even as just a 2-drop, if you were playing a champion, a deck that didn't really need champions, you could just play Elise for 2 mana and she's just great. So I'm pretty sure they give you Elise for free, so that's not really super relevant in the crafting sense, but let's say they didn't. Elise would definitely be a safe pick to craft, because that no matter what, Elise is going to be good for the foreseeable future, and I don't see Elise getting nerfed. All that stuff out of the way, let's get into evaluating the cards.
There is nowhere left to go but up.
So this is what I came up with, and I'll justify all of my decisions shortly. It was really hard to place everything. Originally, I went through them one at a time, and the video was just so long, and it was really wishy-washy, and it was hard. So I just completed the list. Anything on this list can be subject to change. A lot of stuff in this list is interchangeable. I tried to rank it from left to right in terms of how high on the tier they are, but a lot of stuff on here is basically all equal power level, and it was just hard to place them. So starting off the list, we'll just start with the S tier. So Elise and Trundle are my 2 S tier champions. Now, argument actually could be made for maybe even Twisted Fate or Zillion being in there, at least from my perspective. I just think so. For Elise, she is always in the meta. She is playable in literally anything. At 2 mana, a 2/3 fearsome that summons a spider, she's just good by herself. Like, she can fit anywhere. If you want a 2-drop, she's just solid. She has the added synergy of fitting into all kinds of different archetypes, whether it be aggressive, a fearsome archetype, a spider archetype, a self-sacrifice archetype, a go-wide archetype. She fits in like literally any archetype that is Shadow Isles, and she's well statted for a 2-drop, so, just pretty straightforward. Trundle, after his buff, kind of fits the same bill as Elise. He is just a very versatile, powerful card on his own. He doesn't really need anything to build around. However, he's got tons of build around decks that work with him as well. If you're playing Freljord and you don't know what champion to play, you just play Trundle. Like, that's just it. It's not like you're going to play Freljord and be like, oh, I don't know what fits here. I'm not sure what champion to play. Let's play Ashe. No, if you ever don't know what to play, you play Trundle and Freljord. It's just that simple. He is absolutely busted for what he does. He's a safe card to craft, and he's always going to be somewhat viable. He doesn't need to be the best deck in the game the way that Ari Kennen is. However, you're not going to be sad to have Trundles or to make Trundles. Unless they nerf him again. But I highly doubt they're going to nerf him. They just buffed him, and now he is extremely versatile. Literally fits in any Freljord deck. Moving on to the A list, the A tier. So Zilean is top of A. I'm not sure which of the 3 at the top here really gets the spot between Zilean, TF, and Draven. They all kind of fit the same thing. Zilean, his stats aren't insane at a 1/4 for 2. He's a decent blocker. He generates time bombs, which are extremely versatile. He doesn't need to be played in a landmark deck. He was played in the Echo deck, which is a predict deck. He also predicts for you. Just a very powerful 2-drop with the ability to absolutely crush the game if he ever levels up. Doesn't even need any sort of build around. You can just play Zilean. If you're playing Shurima, and same idea. You're playing Shurima, you don't know what to do. You just play Zilean. Easy. Twisted Fate. Now, Twisted Fate, his level up requirement is extremely difficult and requires a build around. The reason he's so high on this list is because most of the time when people play Twisted Fate, they don't even level him up. Like, you're not even playing TF to level him up. That's how strong he is. You play TF, and in terms of versatility, you can just play him in anything Bilgewater. His 3 cards are just, they're all good, and they all have their own flexible, nature to them. Not to mention, if you ever actually level up Twisted Fate, it's just game ending, so... TF is pretty much a no-brainer for me. He's got to be top of A. Whether he's, position 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., I'm not positive, but I do know that TF belongs in top of A. He's extremely versatile card, fits everywhere. Draven, kind of in the same vein as Twisted Fate. Prior to his nerf, Draven probably would have been S tier, honestly, but after nerfing him to a 3/2, he's a little bit easier to remove, so stats aren't quite in line. Nonetheless, Draven generating you axes, Draven having quick attack, he works in so many archetypes. You can play him in a controlling archetype if you want to play like the Tri-Beam type deck. You can play him in aggro archetypes, overwhelm archetypes, discard archetypes, augment archetypes. Draven just fits like everywhere, it seems. And if you're playing Noxus, you can just always play Draven. There's, anytime you're playing Noxus, you literally could just throw Draven in your deck. And I think because of that, he's a very solid card and he deserves a high spot on this list. Now, Zed. So Zed has fallen out of favor in the meta. Haven't really seen too much Zed, if any at all. However, that does not make the card weak. Zed is just extremely well statted for 3 mana. What he does for 3 mana is absolutely insane. He's a 1-card win condition. He doesn't even really need anything to build around him. You just play Zed, and if they don't have an answer to him, he takes over the game. In the past, Zed has had a ton of decks that are actually meta warping. He's not doing it currently, but that doesn't mean he won't in the future, and it doesn't make him a weak card. I think Zed is just a very powerful card. He's pretty versatile, and if you want to go farther and you want to put a deck around Zed, Zed just absolutely just wrecks, and that's why he's got such a high spot on this list, although currently he is not really in the meta. Ezreal kind of fits the same bill as Zed. Basically, Ezreal is he's the kind of card that he does require. Ezreal does require some sort of build around, although his build around cost is not really all that high, especially since his region provides all of it for him. It's not like you need to specifically run P and Z with any other region. P and Z by itself levels up Ezreal. And he fits in so many archetypes. He fits in like even the Draven archetype, the Tri-Beam archetype. You could play Ezreal in aggro, and although it's not, the most amazing, it still works. He generates value through Mystic Shots. He threatens to end games on his own. He's really not that hard to level up. Just overall super flexible. You could literally play him in any region and find success just because PNZ already offers him everything he needs. Next is Sivir. So Sivir is pretty high on the list. You could argue that Sivir could be a little bit lower. I just think that her level up requirement is kind of like, it doesn't really require any specific deck. You just play units and you will eventually level Sivir. And when Sivir levels and she attacks with any sort of board presence, it's just game changing. The card itself at a 5/3 quick attack spell shield is extremely annoying to deal with, so even if you weren't playing to level up Sivir, just as a 4-mana 5/3 spell shield with quick attack, she's already super powerful. And, add in the fact that her level up requirement is not really all that hard. You can just, whether you're doing it with spells or units, you'll get there. And when she gets there, she just threatens to end the game. So Sivir could probably be a little bit lower on the list. I do have a little bit of a personal bias for Sivir. I really like the Sivir Akshan deck, but you can't really argue that Sivir is powerful. Sivir is definitely a powerful card, and that's why I have her so high. Next up, we got Zoe. Zoe is just a 1-card win condition. That's pretty much it, right? Like, she's always viable, and she'll find a way to make it work. You just put Zoe in a deck, and Zoe can win by herself. If they don't kill Zoe, they will literally just lose to Zoe. Not to mention the insane amount of value that she will generate as long as she gets to hit the Nexus. So, Zoe by herself is already just an insane card. Add any sort of deck build around to her, and she just gets even more crazy. Can't really argue with Zoe being there. Zoe's definitely top, like high A tier. Heimer, maybe I'm biased with the Heimer being so high up. I just think Heimer is going to generate you a ton of value. It doesn't really matter what archetype he fits in. The only thing is he doesn't fit in a unit archetype. So if you're playing a deck that's all units, yes, Heimer doesn't fit. However, that's so rare. And you can play Heimer in any region, right? Like, let's just say Demacia. Sharp Sight's going to generate you stuff. Single Combat's going to generate you stuff. Like, you still have spells. All regions and all decks basically are still running spells, and if you're running spells, Heimer's going to get you value. And Heimer, much like Zoe, threatens to end the game by himself. So just by having Heimer on the board, he absolutely must be removed. He is a game-ending threat and an insane value engine. I think he does deserve a spot in A. Maybe he should be lower in A tier. However, I don't think he's B tier. He's certainly A in my opinion. Sejuani. Now, Sejuani is a little bit less flexible than the rest of the cards thus far. However, I think her ability and her, Sejuani herself is just so powerful that it still warrants a spot on this list, or in the A tier. She comes down, she frostbites a unit and gives it vulnerable, which essentially lets her kill a unit. So she basically comes down and kills something. And if she ever levels, she shuts down all, creature-based strategies. If your strategy has anything to do with using the board, you can't do anything to level Sejuani. You have to get her off the board before you even can consider doing anything. She's a very real threat on her own, and her stats are really not that bad. 6-7, Overwhelm for 6, pretty damn good, and if she levels up, it's just insane. So Swain has fallen out of the meta a little bit. I just think Swain is pretty powerful and he's pretty versatile. That's really it. So Swain left on the board will end the game, and you can't just leave Swain on the board. Swain's level up requirement is really not that hard to meet. Noxus already covers it very easily. Ravenous Flock is 33% of his level up requirement, and if you're playing Swain, you're most likely going to be running 3 Flocks. He fits with any region. You could honestly just mix Swain with anything because Noxus gives him everything he needs already, which just makes Swain a very potent threat. His stats are not bad either. He's a pretty beefy boy, and you have to block him. If you ever let Swain hit your Nexus while leveled up, you pretty much just lose the game. So, while he is not meta at the moment, I do think Swain is extremely powerful, and I would not be surprised to see him re-enter the meta. So next we got Fizz and Lulu. I'm not sure. So from this point of the list, it's kind of hard to determine who should be where. So I would say the rest of the A tier is kind of interchangeable depending on your opinions. So, take that with a grain of salt. Fizz is here. Fizz is kind of like Twisted Fate in the sense that you can just play him in any deck. If you're playing Bilgewater, you can literally just play Fizz. He's just a good card. He's a solid 1-drop. He's very hard to remove. Even if you're not running that many spells, it always makes your opponents think twice before trying to remove him. He chips in damage. He can be his own win condition, although not to the same effect as others in this list, so maybe he should be moved down a bit. Overall, I just think Fizz is extremely versatile. He fits in a ton of stuff. And, you know, he's just a pain in the ass to deal with. His effect is so powerful. Then we got Lulu. So Lulu is arguably more versatile than Fizz. I'm not sure, but Lulu just is, she comes down so early at 3 mana and she pumps up your weak stuff to strong stuff, and she really just threatens a ton of damage. Whether you're pumping up elusives or challengers or just regular units, it doesn't really matter. You don't need to build a deck around Lulu. Most likely, anytime Lulu's attacking, you'll have something on board that's going to be weaker than a 4/4, and now all of a sudden it's a 4/4. Add any sort of keyword to that unit, and it just gets bonkers. Lulu's a must-remove threat, and if you can't remove Lulu, you need to remove anything that she can potentially support, because Lulu will snowball the game on turn 3. And that is why I gave her a spot so high up on the tier list, because she comes down early and she threatens immediately. Next, we got Akshan. So there could be an argument for Akshan to be in B, but I don't think so. I think Akshan's very versatile. Like, yeah, he kind of has the sort of requirement that you need to cast stuff on yourself. However, I just think he's solid. His stats aren't amazing. Like, he's a 2/2 with quick attack for 2, sure. But the Warlord's Palace in itself is just good. Like, if that was an actual minion that played that, or what are they called? Follower. Like, if a follower had Akshan's ability, he would be a 3-of in every single Shurima deck. No questions asked. So I think Akshan by himself is just good, generating the Warlord's Palace. You know, with the countdown that inevitably goes down, is just solid. He's a huge value card. Any decks that you actually build around Akshan, he's going to shine and be a beast. So I think Akshan deserves A. And, you know, you could argue that he could be a little bit lower. I just think he's very flexible and he's just very strong. Kindred, I can't believe I'm saying this. I'm putting Kindred in A tier. If you asked me this a couple months ago, Kindred would be like low C, maybe even D tier. However, hey, what can I say? They buffed Kindred. They made her cost 1 less mana, which made an insane difference. I can't believe that. Basically, Kindred threatens 2-for-1, right? The second you play Kindred, if they don't kill Kindred, they no longer can trade units with you on the board. You don't even actually need to play any sort of removal with Kindred to have Kindred be a threat. That's what makes it so good. Kindred also is a decent statted quick attack unit, so it's hard to block Kindred. All of this adds up to some great value and making the opponent have to remove it. And if it's a card that comes down fairly early that needs to be removed, otherwise it threatens insane value, it's got to be good, and I think Kindred's A, and I think Kindred will continue to be a very strong card moving forward. Ziggs. Now, Ziggs is up here mainly because he was featured in the aggro archetype a little while back. Ziggs is a 3-mana 3/4 with an insane ability. Like, in a vacuum, like, without even adding anything else to it, Ziggs is already busted. Like, he's very well statted, arguably overstatted considering he has an upside. He's got the absolute best stats you can have for a 3-mana unit at the moment. And he also deals 1 damage guaranteed to the Nexus and 1 to a blocker. Add in the fact that you can actually synergize him with something, and he's crazy, right? He fits in Bandletree, he fits in aggro, he fits in landmarks, fits in a whole bunch of stuff. And in terms of a 3-mana unit, he's just like the best 3-mana unit. So can't really, you know, argue that. Next, we got Ahri. So Ahri's up here not actually because of the Ken and Ahri deck. Ahri's up here because of the utility Ahri brings. I believe Ahri is actually a very interesting and powerful champion. At the moment, people are sick of Ahri, and you would think like, oh, Ahri's S tier because of Ken and Ahri. But no, I don't necessarily think so. If Ken and Ahri were to get nerfed, I think Kennen would probably see no play, whereas Ahri has so many creative uses you could use with Ahri. You could play Ahri with challengers that are cheap, like the Flame Chompers or even the bird, the 2/1 bird thing. And Ahri will just, you know, use it to kill them. You could play Ahri with Bright Steel Protectors for barrier, or literally any unit that will give you a play effect you could have with Ahri, and it makes Ahri so good. not to mention the free damage she gets in if you have elusives. I think Ahri is actually very flexible, and she is a great utility card. Not to mention, if you somehow manage to level Ahri in a non-Ahri deck, she threatens to end the game by herself. So, Ahri just very powerful, very versatile. I think it can fit in a ton of archetypes. It just hasn't been explored yet because Kennen Ahri is just the best way to play her. And if that ever gets nerfed, I think we will see Ahri in all kinds of different things. All right, next up we got Teemo. Teemo is actually my most played champion, so maybe this is a little personal bias putting him up this high. However, I just think Teemo is much like Ziggs. He threatens to, like, he's just good. He's a good aggro card if you want to play him in an aggro deck. He fits in Bandletree. He hits 2 units. He fits in his own deck, and you know, if you just want to play him, he's just good. So Teemo threatens to end the game in the Puffcap archetype by himself. There is no one drop more dangerous than Teemo in the entire game when leveled up. Arguably Zoe, sure, but you can survive a couple turns of Zoe. If Teemo hits you like even once while leveled up, it's probably game over. That's kind of why I put him up here. You could argue that Teemo can be lower, and I would accept that. So, Viego. I am personally not a fan of Viego. I know a lot of people really love this guy. I just don't see it. So the reason Viego's not an A tier, you could argue that he should be A tier. I just don't think he's flexible. Honestly, I would probably maybe even argue for lower in B. It's just Viego does threaten to end the game by himself. That's the one saving grace that Viego really has, is he does threaten to end the game with one card, right? Like, he's one card that can end the game. So he has to be higher up on the list because of that in itself. However, in terms of flexibility, he's a slow card, and being played outside of Ionia, which is not the region he's from, that's the problem. Like, if he was an Ionia card, Viego would be busted. But because he's in Shadow Isles, in order to protect him and keep him going, you have to play him in Ionia. You could argue maybe Demacia, but even then, he's so not flexible that he just can't be A tier for that reason. If Viego was more flexible, he would easily be a busted champion, but since he's such a slow card with a basic locked-in region combination, he just can't pass B, in my opinion. Pantheon. Pantheon is kind of similar to Viego, honestly. Basically, Pantheon, threatens to end the game on himself. He's a dice roll, a slot machine. You roll the dice. Does he have the right keywords? If he has the right keywords, then you end the game. If not, then you lose. So Pantheon he's not really that flexible. He's definitely more flexible than Viego. There's a lot of different regions that actually have target your own stuff. You could even play him in Shadow Isles, self-sacrifice counts. You can play him in Shurima, Demacia, Ionia, obviously Targon. I think that's really it. I might be missing one, but either way, he's more flexible than Viego. He's not quite as dangerous as Viego when leveled up, because Pantheon's level up requirement is a lot easier to reach. However, I do think Pantheon is quite powerful and somewhat flexible, so I put him a little bit high on this list. Shyvana's next. Shyvana is, in my opinion, stronger than Pantheon. However, Shyvana is less flexible than Pantheon. Shyvana will threaten to end the game if you let her level up, because she's going to just keep generating insane value and get super big with her dragon spell thingy that she gets every round. Problem is, she's just not flexible. You kind of have to play her with dragons. There's very few regions that actually have dragons, which makes Shyvana much like Viego, where she's kind of locked into certain combinations. In the future, if more dragons come out and there's more diversity, then she can definitely move up the list. But at the moment, for me, she's just not versatile enough to be put high up. Jace. Jace is actually very versatile. The only thing that's weak about Jace is that he's required to play 6-mana spells. So honestly, you can play Jace in any region. Every region has good 6-mana spells. The only downside to it is that they have to be 6 or more. So he is locked into a specific archetype, whereas a lot of the other unit champions on this list are not, and that's kind of why Jace is so low. He's not even low, he's pretty high. Jace is very flexible. Misfortune. Misfortune's been seeing a lot of success recently with Scouts. I didn't put her on here because of Scouts. I just think MF is actually a very strong card. In terms of a 3-drop, she's actually just powerful. Like, her ability is amazing. Even non-leveled, and if you ever level her up, she just ends the game. That's really it. You don't really need to play her in Scouts if you're playing Bilgewater or any sort of unit-based deck. She just fits. She fits into anything that's unit-based, and she's going to do a ton of work for you, so I think MF deserves a spot in the B tier. Vi. Vi actually requires 0 build around. I didn't want to put Vi in S tier because she is technically extremely versatile, just because she's not quite as powerful as the others. Basically, you just put her in your hand and then you play spells or cards in general, and she gets big and you play her and she does stuff. So, you know, Vi is extremely flexible. She doesn't require any sort of archetype at all. You can literally play Vi in anything and she will work. So, you could argue to put Vi much higher on the list. I just think that she's not quite as game ending or as powerful as some of the other cards. Ashe. You should probably put Ashe a little bit lower on this list, honestly. I just kind of really like Ashe. I think Ashe is kind of like the pinnacle of like balanced champion in this game. She's not as flexible considering you need to have the frostbites. She does provide her own frostbites when she attacks. It's just 4 attacks with Ashe, seems like a lot. Her champion spell is not bad. I would say Ashe requires minimal build around. You don't need to build a full frostbite deck for Ashe to work. And in general, Ashe is just okay. So I kind of put her in the middle, but you can argue that Ashe should be lower. I just kind of, really like Ashe, so putting Ashe there. Lux. Lux is not quite as flexible as Jace. I don't know. It's tough. I think the fact that Jace has the double mode makes Jace better than Lux. Lux is definitely game ending if you have enough stuff. I just think that she needs a lot of spells to really go off. Whereas Jace, yes, he needs to cast 6-cost spells, but it's far fewer. If you really want your Lux to be popping off lasers constantly, you need to have a ton of spells in your deck. And for that reason, I just put Lux low. She's not really the greatest statted either. 5 mana, 3/5 barrier. Yeah, it's great on the turn you play her, but beyond that turn, she's really not an offensive unit, or she's sort of defensive, but her stats are not great, and her effect is a little bit slow, so I just put her there. Riven. I actually think Riven's great. Riven's solid. Riven is kind of much like Ashe. She's just very well-rounded. Her stats are great. 3 mana, 4/3. Or no, sorry. 3 mana, 3/4. Generating Blade Fragments. Blade Fragments fit in all kinds of different decks. You don't even need to fit them in decks. They're just cool cards. They just kind of buff your shit. Riven's pretty versatile, and I think she's just kind of like middle of the pack. Riven has been known to be super strong at points and super weak at others. I think the middle is probably a good spot for her. Caitlyn. Well, Caitlyn is kind of the same shit, really. Caitlyn is just a 3 mana 3/3 with quick attack. You put her in her own deck, and yes, she's insane. However, just by herself, she's just a good playable card. Caitlyn would see play in every single P&Z deck if she was a follower, and for that reason, I just put her in the B tier. Thresh. Thresh doesn't also really need much of a build around. The only real build around Thresh has, which is why he's a little bit lower on this list, is you need a second champion that is devastating. That's really it. Like, Thresh doesn't need to have all of this kill my own units type of stuff. You can just leave Thresh on the board and he'll eventually level, right? Through playing the board and trading and all that, and even Thresh challenging stuff, he's going to level up. So you don't really need a huge build around like that to make Thresh work. The problem with Thresh is Thresh needs a big boy champion to pull out of your deck. You can't just play like Thresh and, I don't know, like let's say Thresh and Jace, right? That's not all that devastating. Like, oh wow, he pulled out a free Jace, big deal, you know? So that's Thresh's biggest crutch. He needs to be paired with an absolute bomb. There's not too many absolute bomb champions, and a lot of them are rather weak. Senna. Senna's ability is just great. That's really it. She generates the darknesses, and so she's got her own self-sufficiency. Although darkness is weak if you play just Senna without any buffs to him, it's still removal, but giving your the ability to cast slow speed spells at fast speed is just very crazy, and every single region can take advantage of that. So Senna, while she doesn't really fit in every deck per se, she is very flexible, and she can fit with pretty much any region combination and do some cool-ass shit. As cards get printed in the future, I could totally see Senna getting busted. They have to be really careful about what slow speed spells they print due to this one card. J4? J4 is okay. J4 is kind of like, he's just okay. Like, I don't really know what to say about J4. He is versatile. You can play him in any unit-based deck. The ability that he has is pretty cool. He comes out, and when he's leveled up, he is very threatening, especially since he gets free trades constantly. Not really anything to write home about. He's just very well-rounded and solid. GP took a little bit of a nerf. I would definitely have considered putting him up there with Sejuani prior to his nerf, but, you know, he had to pay for his sins. GP is still strong, though, and if you ever actually level up GP, he threatens to end the game on his own. Insane effect. The barrel makes him more versatile. So essentially you can play GP in a slower archetype if you want to play like Kegs or something, and GP really fits into there well. Overall, GP's nerf really hurt him and put him down on the list for me. He's not quite as flexible as he once was. He used to be extremely well statted for what he did, and, you know, losing that 1 HP really did make a difference. Taliyah is not flexible at all, honestly. She's only up here because she is powerful. Taliyah is flexible in the sense that she can copy any landmark, so she does have a ton of different synergies. However, she is only playable really in landmark decks, and for that reason, she's kind of at the bottom of B tier. I think she's very powerful in her own right, and she has some very strong combos, but yeah, she definitely couldn't be A tier or even high B tier. I would argue she could maybe be top of C. Tarek's just very good. I don't know. I like Tarek. Yeah, he doesn't play like... He's not in a ton of decks or anything, but he could be. Like, his ability is just so... It's so chill. You attack in and you just pass buffs. And basically every region, for the most part, has some sort of buff that you can bring. Targon has its own buffs, so you don't need to even leave region if you want to just keep buffs, you know. You could play all the Targon buffs and then mix him with anything. His ability is really powerful, and you can play him in a support archetype. You could probably play him in anything but aggro. Even aggro, maybe. Like, I could totally see like a Might Tarek list happening. So I think Tarek is flexible. I think he is strong. He's just not quite as strong as the rest. Nami is medium flexible. She just requires a lot of spells, really. You can play Nami with any region. She just requires a ton of spells to really get going, and she's a little bit slower. Nami's effect is incredibly powerful, so although she is slightly less versatile than a lot of the other champions, I couldn't really put her in C tier because of her power. Anivia and Karma, I'm just going to lump these two together. These are kind of like the late game queens. If you ever get to 10 mana and you have either of these champions, you're probably going to win the game. Anivia is extremely frustrating to deal with when she levels up, and Karma is, you know, she just doubles your spells. Unfortunately, the archetypes that they fit into are rather, like, limited. There's not too much you can really put them in. Yes, there's a whole bunch of different Karma decks, or even Anivia decks for that matter, but they all really do the same thing. So, because they're not quite as versatile, while powerful, they couldn't go higher on the list for me. Xerath is, I guess, kind of like Taliyah. I think Xerath is way less flexible than Taliyah, though. Taliyah fits in something like Frozen Thralls, whereas Xerath won't. Taliyah fits in, you know, even like an Auction list to double the Auction, Warlord's Palace, etc. Taliyah fits all kinds of places. Xerath really doesn't. Xerath needs to be in a specific archetype, whether that's Mono Shurima or just landmarks in general. Thing is, Xerath got buffed, and he is insanely strong in his own right. So because of Xerath's power and he's like slightly flexible, I did let him have a spot in B tier, but you could argue that Xerath should be lower based on his inability to flex. Azir is actually really flexible. I mean, there's really not much to it. He's his own card. You just put a 0 on the board, and anytime you attack, you get a Sand Soldier. So, you know, while he's not seeing any real play at the moment, I don't think that Azir is going to be gone from the meta forever. Somebody will find a way to break him. His nerf to the requirement to level him up really hurt him. If it was back to normal, he would probably be higher on the list. However, Azir is extremely flexible. Like, you can literally play him with anything. Like, you just play Azir plus any region, and all he does is sit on the board and then generate you free value. So that's why Azir's in B tier. Although he is not as powerful as Xerath, he is certainly way more flexible. Shen is pretty flexible, actually. He can kind of play in any unit-based deck. He's not the strongest champion, but Shen, he does work. Like, Shen's really not all that bad at all, so I just have Shen up here. I think he's better than anything below it in terms of flexibility and viability. Lee Sin. Now, Lee Sin is not flexible really at all, honestly. There's only like one real good Lee Sin deck. I just think that his deck that he plays in is so good that he deserves to be up here, because Lee Sin can always threaten to break the game in the future. Now, you could argue like, well, if you're letting these champions up here, why is Kennen so low? I don't think Kennen is really what breaks the Ahri Kennen deck. I think it's actually more so Ahri and the recall package in general. You could remove Kennen from that deck and you probably still win like shitload of games. I don't think Kennen changes that, whereas Lee Sin is the deck. And Lee Sin is always threatening to break the game. Anytime they print an Overwhelm card, they have to think about Lee Sin now. So granting Overwhelm needs to be very carefully looked at due to this card. And that's kind of why he's so high up here. While he may not be so versatile at the moment, the fact that one printed card will absolutely break the game means Lee Sin's got to be up here. Lissandra, I mean, she gives her Nexus tough. She's kind of cool. She's not so flexible, sure. She's kind of flexible. I mean, you can play her in a whole bunch of different stuff. She's basically like the big boy archetype champion. She's pretty powerful, and the Watcher is cool. So there's a bunch of different ways you can play Lissandra. I just think Lissandra's... She's not quite C tier, but she's definitely not high B. So yeah, that's why we put her here. Moving on through the C tier. So I'm just going to lump Nasus and Renekton together. Nasus and Renekton are just not really flexible. That's it. They fit in the archetypes that they fit in, and they're not even really particularly amazing in that. Nasus is better than Renekton because Nasus actually has a successful archetype, whereas Renekton really doesn't. Overall, they are still pretty good in comparison to a lot of the other champions on this list. Renekton is more flexible than Nasus, however, Nasus is stronger. Sion. Sion's a powerful champion. He's just not flexible at all, and at the moment, after his nerfs, he's seen almost no play, and I don't really think Sion's going to see a whole lot of play for a while, so that's where Sion is. Hecarim's a weird one. Hecarim, you could argue, should be lower in the list. The thing about Hecarim is he represents a very real threat all by himself. You literally play Hecarim and attack, and all of a sudden you have to do something about it, or he threatens to kill you. For that reason, I think Hecarim definitely deserves a spot higher up in the C tier. He doesn't even require a build around, but if you do build around him, the problem he's so weak at the moment is just because his build around archetype is weak. In the future, I can see Hecarim being strong. He's very easily a card that can get broken, so I think he does deserve a spot in higher up C. Rumble, I guess Rumble and Jinx are kind of similar. Basically, Rumble and Jinx are like discard archetype. You have to play them in a discard deck. You don't really have to play Rumble in a discard archetype. Same with Jinx, I suppose. It just works a lot worse. They are both very threatening in the sense that they can take over the game if they level up. But they're not quite as game-ending as the champions really above them. Well, most of the champions above them, I should say. So for that reason, I'm kind of just putting them, a little bit higher in the C tier. They're definitely not B tier champions. So yeah. Tristana is not really all that linear, honestly. I mean, yeah, you want to play units, but you can splash all kinds of different ways to play Tristana. You can play Noxus with Might. You can play Shadow Isles with Atrocity. And as cards will get printed, Tristana will actually get stronger. So while Tristana currently might deserve a spot lower on this list, I think in the future Tristana is only going to get better as they print more multi-region cards, which is why I have Tristana where she is. Tryndamere and Darius, I'm just going to lump these two together as well. They're basically just big Overwhelm beaters. That's all they do. Tryndamere is a little bit better than Darius because Tryndamere fits in Field Rush and Ramp. You could play like a War Mother's Call, which Mogwai was doing. Outside of that, like, they basically see no play. The only play they see is being cheated in and buffed. So that's why Tryndamere and Darius are here. They are just basic vanilla beaters. They don't do anything crazy. Aesol. Now, Aesol is arguably powerful, more powerful than every single card on this list if you put him in a vacuum. Problem is that's never really a reality. He costs 10 mana. His effect is insane. His stats are insane. He has Spell Shield. Just a solid card. The problem is he's not super duper flexible in what he does. But he's flexible enough that he can definitely be in the higher end of C tier. I don't know if I would want to put him in B. You could argue that he's low B tier. Lucian is just like, Lucian has the ability to just take over the game and end it. The problem is he only can do that in a specific archetype, and he's so easily shut down. That's the main issue with Lucian. His potential power is much like Asol, where they have the potential to just be insane, but in reality they're often just lackluster. And back to Asol, Asol is often a win more card as well. So a lot of times you're playing Asol in a position you're already winning, and if you're really losing and you play Asol, you're probably going to lose regardless. Victor is actually pretty darn flexible. I mean, Augment, he creates his own keywords. He's not the most powerful champion, but I can definitely see him getting stronger in the future. Because he's so flexible and there's so many cards in the game already that create cards, I see no reason why Victor can't be like mid to low C. Diana is pretty much locked into the Nightfall. So of all of the specifically locked into an archetype champions, I think Diana is actually the best. You could argue Vigor is as well. The next three champions, Vigor, Echo, and Diana, they are all probably pretty interchangeable. Now, in terms of flexibility, they have none. They have to just play in the same in their respective deck. As more cards get printed, hopefully they will be able to expand into other regions, but really that's not going to be seen for the foreseeable future. So for that reason, they're all kind of here in the middle to bottom of C. Echo has to be in basically Predict. If you don't play Echo in his own Predict deck, he's basically just not that great. You can play him in meme gimmicky decks, sure, and I could definitely see Echo breaking the game in the future. Just at the moment, he's not really there, so he's extremely unflexible. Vigor, same idea. If you don't play Vigor in Darkness, then you just can't play Vigor at all. And while Darkness is a very powerful deck, he is just not flexible. I have Senna much higher on the list than him, which is his partner in crime. The difference being Senna offers you value in any region you play, whereas Vigor can only be played in the specific one deck. Kennen, same idea actually. I might as well have lumped all four of them together. Kennen, same thing. Try playing Kennen outside of Ari Kennen, and he's basically unplayable. So that's basically why he's so low on the list. He has no real versatility or flexibility. Braum, while Braum is flexible, he is just weak. So that's all there is to that. Braum can be played in anything Freljord. It's not like Braum is locked to any specific region. He's kind of a cool champion. He's just weaker, that's all. LeBlanc, much like Braum, she's not really locked into any sort of combination. Just being a 3-mana 5/2, she's just too vulnerable to dying. She doesn't really offer you all that much. She just seems weak. That's really it. Poppy, same idea. Poppy got nerfed. Poppy is a little bit more flexible than a lot of the other stuff on the list. Just the problem is at 2 attack, she doesn't buff anything anymore, so she's just so weak. Quinn is only playable in Scouts. Scouts weren't even playable prior to this patch, so if the meta shifts and Scouts fall out of favor, Quinn is literally just unplayable garbage, so that's why I have Quinn so low. You can potentially move Quinn somewhere else in C tier, but Quinn is definitely not a B tier champion. It's just not a good card. Good old Tammie Kench. Tammie Kench is, much like the others. At this point, we're just looking at niche champions, so he only really fits in one archetype. He's more flexible than his partner, Soraka. However, he's also just not that flexible. Vlad is a little bit more flexible because you can play him in an aggro deck as well as his own, like the Vampire Ice deck, whatever it's called, the Scargrounds deck with Braum. He's just not great. I don't know. That's really it. He only really fits in one deck. He could arguably fit in an aggro deck. I can see Vlad being better in the future when more cards get printed, but at the moment, he's just not quite there. Leona, Daybreak is just weak. That's it. She only fits in one deck. She's the only Daybreak champion, and Daybreak's not that great. Nocturne. Now, Nocturne is not beside Diana because Diana is more flexible and just better than Nocturne. You could play Nightfall without even playing Nocturne, and you still probably won't change your win rate all that much. And for that reason, I just think Nocturne's weak. There's not enough good Nightfall cards to really make use of the guy. And I think his level up condition might just be a little bit too hard because of how difficult it is to get it, like that many Nightfall cards on the board. Garen's pretty straightforward. I mean, Garen is actually very versatile. You can play Garen in anything. It's just Garen's just weak. He's just a super basic card. You could argue that Garen could be up there with Darius. The problem with Garen also is his level up where he rallies at the start of turn. It only works on the opponent's turn. So you half the time he's just rallying for no reason. It's just kind of dumb. Yasuo, you could argue Yasuo could be higher in this list. I really like Yasuo. Just same idea. Yasuo requires a specific deck, and the problem with Yasuo's deck is it's just not even good. Like, you put Yasuo in his actual deck, and it's still not that great. I do have one deck where I play Yasuo and Ahri, and I actually do think that deck is very good. But outside of literally that one deck, Yasuo is pretty much unplayable, so... And you would even argue that Kennen is better than Yasuo in his own deck. Can't be high on the list. Soraka is less flexible than Yasuo. She has less of an impact. She's only playable in one real deck. You could play her in the future if there's a lot of big units that you want to heal. I just don't really see it at the moment, so Soraka's down here. Maokai, well, Maokai is more flexible than the others. The problem Maokai suffers from is he needs to level up to really do anything impactful. A 1/4 that summons Sapling sometimes is just not that great. His effect is game-ending. He does have a game-ending level up. So the problem is he's only really leveling up in Deep or some sort of janky archetype. Maokai could definitely move up this list in the future, but at the moment he's just not quite there. Aurelia... she got nerfed to the ground. Aurelia's just, pretty bad at the moment. So I just got her down here. She could be somewhere else in C, but she's definitely not B tier. Kalista has, only one real archetype, and it's not even strong. She's got a pretty gimmicky deck. She's not a flexible champion, and not even a good champion in the best conditions. Malphite actually can be game-ending. It's just he's got 0 flexibility. He's a rock, so he's not flexible at all. And because of that, he's also not very strong. So it's putting Malphite at the bottom. And then we got Aphelios. Aphelios is better than everybody in D tier. However, he's just a little bit weak at the moment. You could argue Aphelios is better than a bunch of the champions here in C, and you could move him wherever you like. And I would probably agree with you. However, I just wasn't really sure where to place him, so I just placed him in the bottom of C. Last tier is the D tier. So Fiora, well, Fiora in a vacuum is actually not that bad. She's an alternate win condition. The problem with Fiora is she requires a super duper specific deck. If you don't draw Fiora, because you have to build a deck around her. So building a deck around Fiora requires that you draw Fiora, which in itself is already a loss. Minimorph stops this champion completely. Vengeance, if you're not playing in Ionia, stops this champion completely. If you want to kill any units with Fiora, it requires an investment prior to it. Overall, it's just, even in the best her own archetype, she's just, not flexible and not that great. So Pyke and Rek'Sai. I think Pyke is more flexible than Rek'Sai by far. Even Nautilus, we'll just put all 3 of these here. The reason these champions are in D tier, it's not because they're bad. These champions are actually perfectly fine. It's just, they only fit in their very super specific deck, and they have no hopes of flexing out of it. Pyke arguably could, whereas at least Veigar, does something. I just feel like Rek'Sai does absolutely nothing outside of the Rek'Sai deck. Nautilus is literally a 0/13 outside of a deep deck. Pyke could arguably be in C tier, maybe. But yeah, so that's why they're there. And Katarina, the absolute worst champion in the game. I don't know if that's really true. The reason I have Katarina here, although Katarina is one of my favorite League of Legends champions, sadly, it's because I personally believe Katarina is best played as a one-off. So, very powerful effect, just, it's a tempo loss. There's so much stuff wrong with Katarina that it has to be the worst character, champion, when the optimal way to play it is as a one-of. In very specific niche decks, you gotta know it's weak, right? Everything else on this list, you want to play 3 copies of, right? Asol, you could argue playing 1 or 2, sure. But Katarina is you don't want to play 3 Katarinas, ever. And you don't even want to play 1 Katarina most of the time. At best, you want to play 1 Katarina, and just because you want to play only one of this champion, I had to put it at the bottom. Whew, that was a mouthful. That was my tier list. Ooh, man, that was quite a list. That took quite a while to do. I thought it was going to be much easier and quicker than that. I've never made a tier list before. I didn't realize how much has to really go into it. I did my best to, be as well thought out as possible. It just took so long. My original version of this was like over 2 hours. It was absolutely insane. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Lists are just, they're always subject to change. It takes a lot of work, so I actually definitely appreciate the effort people will put into theirs if it's well thought out. It's just so tough to evaluate where something belongs relative to something else. Like, it's easy for me to look at a card and tell you it's good or bad, right? Like, if I were to just, pick any of the cards on this list, you're like, hey, what is this champion good? And I could easily say yes or no. But to tell you that this champion is, worse than this one, but better than this one, and have that, for every champion, it gets really tough. So this was definitely a challenging experience for me. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment below if you agree or disagree with my list here. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and I will be having a ton of Legends of Runeterra content in the future. We got the seasonal coming up shortly. T-Dot out.